Welcome. This session is hosted by RIEEE. So we hear people all over campus think about how many E's. It's a research institute for environment, energy, and economics. For anybody who does not know that off the top of your head, we're so thrilled to be hosting this session. It's going to be highlighting the great work of our concert awardees. And so you're going to hear research that spans a lot of different things, transdisciplinary research, really creative stuff, all getting at advancing sustainability research across campus. I'm Christine Hendren. I am, as of a year and a month ago, the director of RIEEE, and still feeling new, thrilled to be here, thrilled to work with all these wonderful people. Many of you have already had the pleasure of working with. And so, Grace, do you want me to share? I think you might be ready to share your screen. Before I hand it off to Grace Plummer, who is the administrator for the concert award program, I'm just going to give, since I haven't had a chance to really do a campus-wide introduction, just a really quick overview of the RIEEE, and just as it pertains to some of our mission that really kind of touches on the concert program. So with that, I am ready for the next slide. Okay, so the RIEEE, as many of you may know, is structurally made up of the Institute, where I mentioned I'm director, and we have 3 centers within the RIEEE. Each of them have a director as well, who you see pictured here. So there's one for each E. Southern Appalachian Environmental Research and Education Center, SAREC, Appalachian Energy Center, and Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis, which is SERPA. And you see the directors, Steve Siegel, Jamie Russell, and Ash Morgan here. We like to say that these are kind of the structural home for a lot of the missions in RIEEE, but it doesn't describe the entirety of everything that we might tackle as we advance sustainability research. So the other people that make RIEEE happen and are extremely integral to our mission are a mixture of research development and programming staff and scientific staff. So Grace Plummer, who you'll hear from next, is research development specialist, and she does all kinds of things to help support working groups and teams as you build momentum toward your own research vision. Caitlin McNeely, thanks to her, we're actually able to administer all the grants that run through our institute and centers, and she is an incredible problem solver, a great communicator, and lovely person to work with. So many of you have figured this out already. We have Janet Miller is our outreach coordinator, and she, or manager, and she runs most of the Energy Center programming that happens, workshops, all kinds of things that she's built. So lucky to have those folks. And then we have Greg Marland, who is actually one of our presenters today. Lucky enough to have him as an adjunct research professor and research scientist in our institute. We have a postdoc, Rodrigo Mercado Fernandez, who works with the Energy Center. And we also have Hey Young Kim, another one of our presenters, who is integral to the Nexus work and lots of Energy Center research. We also have this dotted line because we just want you to be continuing to think creatively. We are looking at different mechanisms to partner with different parts of campus to house scholars that might take a time to research with us with one of our centers. We have a little bit of space to host these scholars if they would rotate through, and just, you know, keep that on your radar for all of you who are working so hard to build big research programs. Okay, so what are we here for? You've probably seen the RIEEE mission stated a bunch of different ways over the time that you have been here, most of you longer than I. But we like to say that RIEEE centers can, and the centers connect, support, and amplify research that all of you are the engine behind. And we do this throughout App State. on environment, energy, economics, and the equity that must underpin sustainable solutions to any of those. So we think of that as type of kind of a fourth E that that is critical to our work too. And also all of their complex intersections. That's really where our IEEE tries to help strengthen transdisciplinary approaches. So we want to help increase the impact of your research, and increase your capacity to do more and bigger to the extent that, you know, that's part of your vision. We want to help elevate the App State profile, connect nationally and internationally, and generate collaborative opportunities that help leverage everything that you're all doing. And then there are really some areas that we are poised as a university and as sustainability specialists in a variety of domain spaces to lead. And so there are some priority areas of sustainability research that RIEEE, the centers, and then all of you are helping us show that we really can be a place that people look to, like the App State, that's where they're doing it right. So we're on the lookout for that. So with that in mind, what we do, part of what we do is these concert grants. And I think of the concert grants as like the seed, right? So literal seed funding. And so what I want to introduce is just a flavor of what the RIEEE working group support services and resources that we're working to build up will do to kind of water that seed and help you grow the seed funding. Our mission is for it to become something bigger, become its own program, whatever that looks like for your domain space. And so we've outlined a little bit of what the working group support functionalities will look like to help these concert grants in all of your efforts. So thinking of this isn't everything that we can do that is that might help research grow, but it is the most relevant to these concert teams and awardees who have really already shown some great momentum. So we've kind of boiled down our working group model into 3 buckets that are most important for what we're developing right now. And this is not a rollout, this is an invitation to our planning process and our development process. So there's room for you all to help us kind of decide what's priority. I also think it's a good time to mention that we work really closely with grants, resources, and services to ensure that, you know, we're not duplicating efforts, we're concentrating our efforts. So there may be things that you need to help your research grow that you fit within our IEEE, but you actually find this service is much better presented and offered through grants, resources, and services. So think of us as a team. In your mental buffer, we can all go in the same kind of cloud. But our working group model has one thing that we have really tried to focus on is institutionalizing our IEEE student research opportunities. A lot of times this just looks like giving something a name, something that's already happening, but when we name it and officialize it, then it builds a cohort culture across students. It can allow visibility and credit for their CVs and for within your departments and your colleges. It also, as we develop some tools, can help with a shared foundation of mentoring that will assist kind of across the mentors of the teams as well as the students, and then position us for bigger things. There are REU grants, training grants. There aren't places that do undergraduate, in particular, research as well as App State. I mean, this is just such a strength of this university, and we want to help that shine and help that get us more research dollars. We also, as we've worked with some of you already, have worked to build up shared infrastructure. So when we understand things that multiple teams might be able to use in terms of social networks, in terms of data and informational infrastructures or physical infrastructures like the farm or a microscope or something, then we can kind of look for ways to leverage it and stack our successes. And then we're also just rolling out some shared services, strategic planning help, ideation, strategy help for working group teams that'll probably be customized to each working group and what you need and where you are. And just be on the lookout for that. We will invite all of you to all of that process. And I think that's it for me. Thank you. And I apologize, I'll have to probably watch back most of your talks later, but I'm really looking forward to a fantastic program. All right, Grace, over to you.
Great, thank you, Christine. Good morning, I'm Grace Plummer. I am in a research development role, as Christine mentioned earlier, in RIEEE, and I just recently became the official administrator of the concert program, and it's been around for quite a while. I actually was in Caitlin's position, post-award administration, when we started it in 2013. We've had changes in leadership during the last 8 years, but this is one program that RIEEE has been very consistent with. The funding priorities have changed over the years, but it's leading to some really interesting outcomes, and there are great things on the horizon. I wanted to give a quick, and this is really interesting for us, I think, this process of looking back at what we've done with concert over the years. So I should first credit Greg Marland, who is here on the call, I think, with a complex acronym for complex work. So it actually stands for Conducting Complex Research Together, concert. So in 2013, we started it. We've had 8 competitions since, and have granted over $200,000. The really remarkable thing in looking back at this is supporting 68 different faculty members representing 21 departments and across 4 colleges and RIEEE, the Energy Center, and CARE. That kind of reach across campus is exactly the sort of thing that RIEEE was founded for. And we're really doubling down now on trying to hone the priorities as a seed funding program, how we want to track those, and what are the metrics that we really want to pay attention to be able to report on and amplify the impact of the concert program. So looking at things, how many students have concert grants supported? Where are they going after? What are they involved in? What are the funding proposals and awards that come out of work seeded by concert grants? So for the FY21 competition, we received 9 proposals requesting over $60,000. We only had half that, but we were able to award the 5 that are represented here today, and the total is just shy of $30,000 worth of awards. There are 15 faculty members supported by the FY21 cohort, but they're not all here presenting today. We have 1 and sometimes 2 representing an award, but you'll be able to see who all was involved in some of the slides down the line. But we still have 9 departments represented and 4 colleges again. There are 4 concert first timers this time around, which is great to see as well. So we're reaching more, attracting more proposers, and that's exactly the sort of thing we want to do. I also want to acknowledge that the last presentation today, you'll hear from Sandy Lane and Adam Hagee. This was first, we co-funded this with the Institute, the Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, Institute for Health and Human Services in the College of Health Sciences. So that it's that kind of reaching across the boundaries and silos on campus is what we intend to do, and this was a great example of it. So the overview for today, this is everyone